come back to that later. We'll get on to the sub-segment number 2 now, which is discussing the final destruction of the official story to do with the sniper. Now, I'll go through this one. This one might be a bit lengthy, so I want the listeners to bear with me. But this is really important because right from the start, we were asking, what is the deal with the sniper? Why didn't he take the shot? And many people were asking this question. So this is a segment that deserves the time we're going to give to it. Now, in episodes 11 and 12, we looked at a number of inconsistencies and outright bizarre claims of the government, police, and mainstream media official story of the incident. And one of the main questions being asked, not just by event skeptics like us, but by regular Australians, was to do with the sniper and why didn't he take advantage of his clear line of sight to the alleged gunman and neutralise him before he could do any damage to the hostages. And on Wednesday following the incident, Channel 7 tried to give us 3 reasons. By the Saturday, Ray Haley of 2GB was still repeating 2 of those reasons. Now, I'm going to recap that shortly, and I'll replay those clips at the end of this segment, but for now, I'll just give you a basic recap. Excuse A, they were afraid he had a dead man switch, in the style of Dennis Hopper from the 1994 blockbuster action movie Speed, starring Keanu Reeves and the gorgeous Sandra Bullock. And of course, Channel 7 even used a screenshot from that film when making this ridiculous claim. You can't make this stuff up. It was ridiculous because it doesn't accord with the official story. The police later raided the cafe with guns and stun grenades blazing and shot the gunman dead. If they were afraid of a bomb going off upon his death, why would they send a dozen police into the blast zone? It's also ridiculous because it means the police took seriously an implied threat about a dead man switch bomb in his backpack when we know they didn't take seriously the overt threats made via videos of the captives which were released online that there were other bombs in George Street, Martin Place and Circular Quay. And we know this because they did not lock down George Street, although they did, to be fair, evacuate the Opera House, which is in Circular Quay and happens to make for great images to be beamed around the world about Australia's latest terror threat. And we know that a few days later they locked down Martin Place around the Flower Memorial because of a suspicious backpack. So if they take even suspicious backpacks seriously enough to lock down parts of the city and send in bomb squads, and they took the gunman seriously enough to think he had a bomb in his backpack, why wouldn't they take his threats about bombs on George Street and Circular Quay seriously enough to shut them down and send in bomb squads? Unless they knew it was all nonsense.
Which we do. We do know now.
Well, we and a lot of our listeners know is complete bomb sense. I mean, think about it. They believed that he had a backpack bomb due to the cables coming out of his backpack, but they didn't believe him about the other bombs, the ones he actually told them about, not even for a second, because that's the official story. It's ridiculous.
Logic.
So the dead man switch excuse is ridiculous. If they believed it, they wouldn't have sent in a dozen men to raid the cafe. And if they believed that he had bombs, they would have locked down and sent the bomb squads into the place he actually claimed to have bombs. So excuse A, they were afraid of a dead man switch, is ridiculous. So we'll move on to excuse B, that sniping targets is a last resort tactic. Apparently, even more last resort than sending in a dozen police officers into a potential blast zone, firing shotguns, throwing stun grenades, while numerous hostages remain in the building. Which makes one wonder what would actually be the point of having the sniper bother to turn up to work that day, or any day for that matter, if that's more last resort than sending in a dozen officers into a potential blast zone. I mean, think about the conversation that's happening there. But boss, I have a clear line of sight. Why would you send in a dozen men into a potential bomb zone when I could just... Negative, O'Doyle. I've told you, you are the last resort. But sir, these officers, they have wives and kids. I could end this all now by just... Quiet, O'Doyle. You snipers are the last resort. Now go back to making small talk with cameraman Greg. It's ridiculous. But here's the thing. This isn't just about mocking it because it's amusingly silly. It also flies in the face of comments by New South Wales Police Commissioner Andrew Scipione, who said this in an interview with Ray Haley on Saturday, December 20. Quote, if there was an alternate to those men having to go through that door and set up a massive distraction, take fire because remember they came under fire, one of the officers was hit and knocked to the ground, injured. If that alternative was to put a sniper in a position whereby they could have brought this to some conclusion, they probably would have done it, I would think, rather than risk going through the door, not knowing what they were confronting, end quote. So the last resort argument also falls down even by the testimony of the New South Wales Police Commissioner, which only leaves us with excuse C, which is that the glass would have deflected the bullet, or what I call the ballistically impossible excuse. Now, this claim was made by both Chris Reason of Channel 7 and Ray Hadley of 2GB in the interview that I just mentioned. And recall that Chris Reason of Channel 7 was at the heart of the entire operation, even hanging out with the sniper during the so-called siege, and was the front man for all of Channel 7's contradictory stories about how and why he and his cameraman were even with the sniper to begin with. And also recall that Ray Hadley of 2GB was so much a part of the operation that he was supposedly receiving phone calls from within the Lindt Cafe during the siege, and in that interview with Scipione that I just mentioned, admits that he is close friends with victim Katrina Dawson's brother, Sandy Dawson, to the point where Sandy phoned Hadley during the siege. So this is the official story of official stories. Hadley and Reason both say they couldn't take the shot because of the glass, even though the video footage clearly shows the gunman right near the glass, clear in line of sight. Now, this is where our regular listener, Bunch O, has stepped in, and I thank him for the link that he provided in the comments section underneath episode 12 on our YouTube channel. He left a link to a university study led by a military-trained marksman entitled The Effects of Commercial Tempered Glass on Rifle Bullet Deflection, a thesis presented to the faculty of the Department of Criminal Justice, California State University, Los Angeles, in partial fulfillment of the requirements for the degree Master of Science by Henry C. Lambert, August 1994. So I took the time to review this study, and the findings destroy the official story. My buddies Red Pill and Press Reset Earth would describe the contents of this study and the consequences it has for the official story like this. Case closed, 100%, blown out of the water, all the way to Saturn. And over the next 5 minutes, I'm going to explain why. Now, I will naturally link to the study at our website so any interested independent researchers can look into this for themselves. But let me spend just a few minutes going through the key aspects of it. Abstract. Quote, since the inception of special weapons and emergency response teams into modern law enforcement units, marksman teams have been employed to provide selective firepower during contingency operations such as barricaded suspects and hostage situations. During these operations, police marksmen are frequently confronted with storefront commercial tempered glass, a significant obstacle that may deflect bullets in an unpredictable manner. This study was conducted in order to explore and quantify the deflection, stability, fragmentation, and lethality of the .308 caliber full metal jacketed bullet. In a classic experimental design, the researcher determined the minimum stability distance of the round when fired through glass. This distance allows marksmen to know the closest distance they may fire a bullet through tempered glass without significant loss in accuracy. The experiment also plotted deflection at various distances and glass angles in order to create a table of deflection for when marksmen encounter tempered glass. End quote. So from the abstract, this is clearly 100% relevant to the very question being considered here.
Yep.
What happens to bullets when fired through tempered, that is, glass which has been treated for greater strength glass, and can accurate shots be fired through it? Now, from the introduction of that same study, again, I'll quote, since the inception of special weapons and emergency response teams into modern law enforcement units, marksman teams have been employed to provide selective firepower during contingency operations such as a barricaded suspect or hostage situation. Employing the use of a well-sighted rifle, marksman teams have the capability to eliminate the threat with surprise effectiveness and without endangering the lives of other law enforcement personnel or the hostage. Marksman teams are taught not to make a shot through glass unless they have a straight-on shot and the target is close to the medium. If they are required to make a shot at an angle, it is usually recommended that the team consider using one shot to remove the glass and another to hit the suspect, a process called simultaneous engagement. End quote.
Yeah.
Now, this verifies exactly what I said in episode 11 about the double shot or simultaneous engagement. Even if you believe the glass would have deflected the bullet, sniper teams are trained to take the glass out with another shot immediately before firing at the ultimate target. Now, I had read this elsewhere, but it is good to have official, formal, military-trained verification that this is a basic tactic of operational teams. But let's pretend that this wasn't an option for the snipers on the day of the siege for whatever reason and continue with the study in question. From the theoretical framework section of that study, quote, this study will attempt to quantify the minimum stability distance for the .308 caliber full metal jacketed round by measuring the size of a three-shot group placed through glass at a 45-degree angle of incidence at varying distances. It is assumed that the greatest operational angle for close glass shots will be 45 degrees. This angle will also produce the greatest deflection for this range from 0 to 45 degrees angle of incidence. The minimum stability distance is reached when the rifle is fired far enough away from the glass to produce a three-shot group that falls within a 5-inch circle on a target placed 5 yards beyond the glass. A 5-inch circle is small enough to ensure that a headshot or shot to a vital area of the anatomy will be achieved. End quote. So for the listener at home, imagine that you have a 5-inch circle, about 12 or 13 centimeters in diameter. This is what this study was testing for. Can you keep bullets to within that circle if the target is 5 meters from the glass when shooting at the target through tempered glass, including at angles? Now, there can be no doubt that the person leading this study was qualified to do so. From the procedures section, quote, "The marksman will be the author. The author has qualified as an expert marksman on the United States Army and United States Air Force qualification courses. He has been awarded 2 gold medals and 1 bronze medal during Air Force Command, 14 separate bases, and international competition. In order to maintain uniformity, the author will fire all rounds of the study," end quote. Now, obviously, I'm not going to sit here and go through the entire study due to time constraints, but as I said, we will link to it on our site, AusRoundtable.com. Now, the study is about 90 pages long and contains all the usual features of a formal study, including abstract, introduction, review of literature, methodology, presentation, and analysis of data, and, of course, conclusions. And this is where I'll read out verbatim some astoundingly pertinent findings. Quote, "Conclusion. Beyond 4 yards, muzzle glass distance, the .308 cal bullet is stable and produces consistent and predictable groups under 5 inches in diameter at 5 yards glass target distance. Beyond 4 yards, muzzle glass distance, the bullet is predictable throughout all angles of the glass between 45 degrees and 90 degrees," end quote. So by this he means that so long as you shoot the bullet more than 4 meters away from the glass, which gives it time to stabilize through the air, the bullet is predictable through all angles, 45 through 90 degrees to a target 5 meters past the glass on the other side. So this could not be more conclusive, but it gets even better. Quote, "Shots placed at 90 degrees glass angle are very reliable. During this experiment, the bullet remained intact for all rounds fired at 90 degrees, making the spread of lethal fragments a small circle. If a marksman had to make a shot where the available target area is small, a 90-degree shot would result in an accurate and predictable impact. A preliminary shot to eliminate the glass would not be necessary," end quote. In other words, when fired at 90 degrees, that is perpendicular to or right in front of the glass, the bullet's trajectory is so predictable that you don't even need to utilize a simultaneous engagement tactic. The bullet basically goes exactly where the marksman wants it to go, even through the glass. And we have photographic and video evidence that the snipers had such a vantage point, not only from the Channel 7 studio, but also from a position on Phillips Street. And finally, to shoot to Saturn any notion that this would be too risky for the hostages inside the cafe, this is also from the conclusion, quote, "During the shooting phase of the present experiment, the researcher noted that glass fragments penetrated the initial target and impacted the wood. None of these fragments penetrated the wood farther than approximately 1/4 of the 5/8 inch thickness. These fragments are of concern. They are not lethal in nature. However, they could cut an artery or blind a hostage near the impact zone. This is a risk. However, the noticeable fragments remained close to the impact zone of the bullet," end quote. So the study finds that even the glass fragments from shooting through the glass remained within the zone around the impact of the bullet. And this is relevant only if the simultaneous engagement option is not used, which I explained earlier. This study verifies to be a trained tactic of sniper teams. Now, I thank the listeners for listening to all of this. It does get a bit technical, but this is so important. Let me tie all this together. Remember, excuse A, the Dennis Hopper dead man switch excuse, is as full of holes as it is comically amusing. Excuse B, the last resort excuse, is undermined by not only the subsequent actions to the raid of the cafe, but by the police commissioner Scipione's own admission that they would prefer an alternative to sending officers into the cafe. And excuse C, the ballistically impossible excuse, is shot to Saturn by the hard scientific findings of a trained military marksman whose study was submitted to California State University 20 years ago and is available for anybody to inspect for themselves. Now that we have established all of this, in a moment I want to play those clips from Chris Reason from December 17 and Scipione from December 20. But before I do, to break up the monotony of my voice, boys, based on what you've just heard, what are your thoughts?
Well, that was one of the first things I thought when that excuse C was presented to the table was, why in a modern society where most buildings surround major cities, why would snipers not be trained to do that? And why wouldn't there be an option or a development in the equipment that they have to try and increase the likelihood of being able to get through the glass? If they say that the bullet would deflect off it, you'd think over how many ever years that's, hostage situations have been happening and the increased, buildings and everything and the increased industrialization of cities, why wouldn't they have made tactics to combat that? That's one of the first questions that you should ask. And now John that was linked in the comments section has brought a scientific study forward saying that you can do this. And it's just, it's ridiculous to think that from such a short distance away, a trained tactical sniper would be the last resort or wouldn't be able to do it. It's completely ridiculous.
It was ridiculous from the start, but what's pleasing for me is that here we have undeniable scientific evidence that it's ridiculous. And again, I want to thank the Bunch O. I'm not reading out his full name because his full name wouldn't get past our family-friendly orientation for this program, Ethan. But Bunch O, he knows who he is. He posted this link in the info box in the comment section underneath one of our videos, and we appreciate him doing that for us. Like I said, I'll put the link to this on our website so anyone can see it for themselves, to verify them for themselves. Based on what you just heard, Tim, because I know that you're a little bit more open-minded to the official story of this whole schmozzle, based on what you just heard, assuming that what I gave you were verbatim quotes from the study, which they were, you can verify this for yourself, do you still believe the notion that these snipers couldn't have taken this guy out if they wanted him to?
I don't believe that they couldn't have taken him out if they wanted to. I think there was always... they always had the potential. I mean, what was this? They were 2 stories high or something. Little cafe. It's not too far off the ground, like 2 stories high. You know, I suppose the only thing, you know, so they're trained to shoot down the glass, then they're trained to shoot the gunman.
If they have to, but as this guy makes clear, if they're shooting at 90 degrees or close to 90 degrees, that's not even necessary because the bullet is so minimally impacted by hitting the glass that it remains on trajectory. They don't need to get rid of the glass to minimize the risk. There is no risk. Just shoot through the glass if you're close to 90 degrees. And remember that sniper in the Channel 7 studio was literally directly across from the cafe to the point where the Channel 7 cameras were getting line of sight footage of the gunman.
Yeah, so if the cameras were getting line of sight footage of him and the snipers were supposedly, with that ridiculous story, needing the cameras to get a view of someone 30 meters away, you'd think when you see him in window 2 or whatever window he was in, of the 4 windows, like the technical terms that sounded more like a camera production to us, window 4, window 2, you'd think after seeing him and the way that they identify that he could perhaps have a dead man switch, seeing him in plain sight, there's no excuse for why they couldn't shoot through it.
Well, with a dead man switch, what I'm saying is if they really believe he had a dead man switch and that if they killed him, that everyone would explode, then they still wouldn't have raided the place with 12 officers later.
That's right.
If they felt they had to send in officers later and take the risk that maybe he did or didn't have the dead man switch, why would they send in 12 officers potentially into a blast zone? Does it take 12 officers to neutralize this target? Especially when you've got one officer who's not even in the building who could have taken him out. If, the moment that you say we don't care if he has a dead man switch, then just take the guy with the sniper. Or if you can't take him out with a sniper, why are you sending 12 officers into the blast zone? It doesn't make any sense. Now that we've spelled that out bit by bit, I'm going to replay a clip that I played last week from Channel 7. Again, they're at the heart of the whole operation. And this is Chris Reason explaining why they didn't take the sniper out. I'm going to play this in full, so listeners, this will take about 3 minutes, so please bear with us. This is the official story, and now that you've heard how it can't make sense, listen to him tell it once again.
As Australia mourns the victims, questions are being asked about the police response. Specifically, could they have disabled him earlier? 7 News has learned what was understandably holding them back. His backpack, because he'd convinced the hostages and police it was a bomb. But it wasn't.
It's the question being asked by so many. If our camera had a clear shot, so did the sniper sitting beside us. So, why didn't he shoot? Experts say there are several reasons. Firstly, he and the other snipers nearby would have been shooting through reinforced glass.
Where you seek to take a shot through glass, the ballistics of it are virtually impossible.
The bullet's path could alter by centimetres, possibly killing a hostage. A kill shot is always a last resort.
That's not what we do in this country, or not that I want to see.
Another reason the snipers held back, that backpack.
7 News can reveal that the pack had wires hanging out of it. It turned out the gunman was carrying an old stereo speaker, but at the time the police didn't know that and had to assume the worst.
Possible explosives with a dead man switch, like this movie version.
We contain and we negotiate, and overall it's about a peaceful resolution. That's what we're seeking. That's our number one goal.
Former police negotiator Belinda Neal says disasters like the Munich Olympic siege and the Beslan school siege prove talking them out is better than taking them out.
It's more successful and there's less loss of life.
The other question being...
Okay, so that was the clip. The rest of the clip just makes up other excuses, what have you. But those are the main excuses. Now, when you listen to that, Ethan and Timbo, and then you compare it to what we've already discussed based on hard science, I mean, how more blatant could the conflicting stories be?
And during that news report, they show the footage of supposedly Man Haron Monis with his dead man switch, and that was the point I was trying to reiterate. If he is in clear view, and we have evidence that the cameramen at least had him in clear view, there's no excuse for why they could take the shot, and the argument that everyone would have exploded is ridiculous, because then they sent 12 men in to die if that was the case.
And it was clear from the footage that even Channel 7 provided that he was within the 5 metres that the study that I cited says is the distance between the glass and the target that he was testing for. Because obviously the bigger the distance between the glass and the target on the other side, the more room, I guess, the bullet has to deflect off its original trajectory. So the tests that we discussed earlier were based on the target being 5 metres from the glass. We saw the target even closer than that to the glass, which makes the potential deflection even lower again.
So all three major excuses that they have for this story are complete rubbish.
Complete rubbish, and I'll just play one more clip. This is from that interview between Hadley and Scipione, where Scipione firstly undermines part of Channel 7, Chris Reason's story, but then reiterates this false narrative about the sniper.
Now, can we dispel the other myth, Commissioner, about the sharpshooters and about the things that people said? Even the witnesses that came out who escaped from this lunatic described the scene of him having wires coming from his backpack as if he was ready to detonate. We now know that it was toughened or hardened glass because it was formerly a bank premises, which would deflect any sharpshooter. I mean, so the armchair experts who've emailed me all week saying, this could have been brought to an end at 2 o'clock on Monday afternoon. It's all stupid stuff. It's silly.
Well, Ray, let's go back to the description I gave you. If there was an alternate to those men having to go through that door and set up a massive distraction, take fire, because remember, they came under fire. One of the officers was hit and knocked to the ground, injured. And if that alternative was to put a sniper in a position whereby they could have brought this to some conclusion, they probably would have done it, I would think, rather than risk going through the door not knowing what they were confronting. So let's let common sense answer the question. I'm not in a position to run commentary on what happened, what should have happened, but I think your listeners can make their own conclusions.
Yeah, I don't think Ray Hadley's listeners can make their own conclusions, but I think that our listeners can make theirs. So I'm going to wrap up this segment before we move on to the other matters. Obviously, from all of this, there are 2 big questions that remain. Why, if this whole thing was legitimate and not a staged event, did the snipers not take the shot? We've established that all 3 official reasons given are contradicted, not only by hard scientific data, but even by the people giving those stories. And question 2, why is the mainstream media, specifically Chris Reason of Channel 7 and Ray Hadley of 2GB, both by their own admission directly involved in the incident, getting away with nonsense excuses which are contradicted by themselves, other key figures in the operation, and elementary science? Now, for me, question 2 is perhaps the more important question, and that's because non-event skeptics are likely to find some other excuse as to why the snipers didn't shoot. They've already accepted as prima facie true that the event was real, and will simply disregard any evidence to the contrary or make up new hypotheses which fit in with their greater conclusion. This is what Leon Festinger termed cognitive dissonance. But nobody, even if they believe the incident was real, can deny that the mainstream media, police and government have given testimonies that are self-contradictory and also contradicted by science. So the question has to follow. Why on earth would anybody trust anything the mainstream media says? If they would lie about these matters, they would lie about anything. That's the reality. And if they can get away with lying about these things, they can get away with lying about anything. So rather than defending the mainstream media, government and police, it's time to hold them to account, even if you still, after all of the evidence, think that the Sydney siege was real.
Absolutely. And I think it's absolutely undeniable at this point. From the get-go, there was troubling questions that we've asked, and as we've come to break down the Sydney siege and break down some of the media coverage and whatnot, it's just become so apparent that it's undeniable now. That I always tell people you need to look at this from a legal perspective. If you look at this through a legal perspective in terms of if you were having someone on trial, there needs to be beyond reasonable doubt. So if the media are trying to push a preconceived conclusion, there needs to be no reasonable doubt. That's just a simple legal terminology. If you want to prove something, a at least in a court of law, you have to prove beyond reasonable doubt to people that have been educated with all the facts. And the problem is people are only believing this because they haven't been told all of these facts, as we've exposed in the last 3 episodes, including this one. They haven't been told all the facts, so they can't make an educated, informed conclusion, and that's because there's an agenda to serve. This same agenda that benefits from this event as a whole, in which is the media and the political establishment.
And meanwhile, the people they trust to inform them are giving them clearly bunkum stories and then describing other explanations as myths. I mean, you heard Haley just there. Let's explore this other myth of why the sniper didn't shoot.
Yeah.
The way they frame the whole narrative, it's laughable. Our listeners can see that. And we're going to move on to the next topic. But before we